I was the one who signed the line. They printed the report. They slid it across the table. I checked the box that said, "Inspected," wrote the date, and put my name. I pressed hard because the paper was thick and the pen had a cheap ball that skipped. I remember that. I remember the scratch of it. I remember thinking, this is the kind of detail you carry with you when the rest of your life comes loose. 3 months later a school bus scraped the guardrail on that bridge and the outer lane sank. The kids were okay. The driver was hurt. 2 cars hit the barrier and bounced. The concrete chipped like a tooth. The video looked worse than it was, but the anger felt earned, and the camera never blinks. When people watched the clip online, they saw my name in a screenshot someone froze at the hearing. They saw my signature and the word "approved." That was enough. I worked for a small city public works office. Titles never mattered much in a place like that. My badge said, "Inspector," but most days I was a runner, a clerk with steel-toed boots. I climbed rebar ladders, tapped concrete, checked rebar cover, measured bolt torque, took photos, wrote notes. I kept my own flashlight in the truck because the issued ones died without warning. I kept a thermos because cheap coffee tastes better if it's hot. That's the kind of man I was. Reliable. The kind you don't notice until you need something and he's not there. The bridge wasn't new. It was a widened older span over a shallow river that cut the town in half. The contractor added an outer lane and a shoulder. New pier caps, new diaphragms, new deck. All of it was supposed to be simple. The work was split between the city, the state, and a federal grant that showed up late and came with strings. We had a material supplier we'd used before. We had a testing lab we hired per job. And we had a schedule that was already a month behind when the first truck rolled up with aggregate that steamed in the cold. The day the concrete poured over the outer lane, I asked for the batch tickets like I always did. The driver handed me a folder and said the lab tech would meet me at the site. I called the number on the form. A kid with a polite voice said he was stuck in traffic, to go ahead and accept the load, he'd make his cylinders at the washout. I told him no. He apologized and told me his supervisor said it was fine. I said it wasn't. He told me his supervisor would call my boss. Then my phone buzzed, and my boss told me to stop slowing the pour. So I did. I stood there and watched the gray slurry cover the bar chairs and climbed to the string line while the cold air bit my ears. We took cores later. The lab stamped its report. The numbers looked acceptable. Low, but acceptable. They added a sentence, within tolerance given cold weather placement. No action recommended. I initialed the sheet, because that's what you do when a test report lands on your desk and your boss taps the page with a finger and says, "We're moving forward." I didn't sleep much that winter. Not for any reason I could name. I was 46. I had a son who played basketball and a dog that needed the same route every morning or she'd refuse to poop. My wife worked at a clinic. Our life had steady noises, washers, fans, the low hum of the old fridge. But after the bridge video, all I heard was my name. Neighbors who used to wave didn't. A local paper ran a line that said, "Inspector signed off weeks before failure." It was one sentence in a long article, but that piece ran like a wire under everything. You could trip on it anywhere. They called me into a conference room that smelled like coffee stirred with pens. The city attorney was there. The director. My boss. A chair sat on the far side of the table like someone was missing. They closed the door, and I knew before anyone said a word. "We're putting you on administrative leave," the director said. He had a way of keeping his hands flat on the table as if he were pinning down a live thing. "Pending the outcome of the investigation." "Investigation," I said. "Independent," the attorney said. I nodded. I knew how that worked. Independent meant they'd hire a firm to say what the people who hired them needed said. It didn't mean untrue. It meant tidy. They asked me to hand in my badge. I kept my thermos. I don't know why that felt important. I tucked it under my arm and walked out past the front desk where a calendar with a scenic lake hung crooked over the copy machine. The receptionist pretended not to see me. I didn't blame her. Not then. A week into being home, the patient calm turned to static. The doorbell rang too often. A man with a phone tried to get me to say something on my porch. A woman from across the street said her cousin drove that road every day and, well, you know. The mailbox filled with flyers I didn't ask for. 2 envelopes came certified. One was from the city. The other from a lawyer representing a driver. I signed for both, shut the door, leaned against it hard for a second like a kid in a storm. My wife and I had the conversation most married people fear. Should you say something? She asked. If I open my mouth, I'll say something stupid. Then write it. To who? Who's in charge of the investigation? I thought about it. Typically, the state transportation department would coordinate with the city. The lab would submit reports. The contractor would submit their own paperwork. Everyone would build a wall of forms. You could punch and only bruise your hands. I wrote anyway. A calm email with bullet points. Dates. Ticket numbers. Names I'd seen on carbon paper and delivery logs. I asked to preserve every document tied to that bridge. I asked that any electronic communications be archived. I used words I'd learned from years of seeing other people in trouble. Preserve. Archive. Notice. They didn't respond. So I did something small and ugly. I drove to the job site on a Tuesday at dusk. I parked under the trees. I put on a safety vest for my truck because old habits don't die. I walked the outer lane, stayed out of traffic, and looked at the patched area where the deck sank. The patch was still dark. It wasn't the part that scared me. What scared me was the long line of coal joint I could see, faint but there, like a seam in bad skin. The finish wasn't smooth across that seam. A good crew trowels out their sins. This looked rushed. It looked like a pour that had been stopped and started while someone figured out a problem. I crouched near a drain and pressed my fingers against the surface. I could feel fine gravel where there should have been paste. Not everywhere. Enough to make me cold. When I got home, I pulled out the box of old field books I kept in the garage. My wife called it my paper hoard. I called it memory that didn't lie. I found the year of the project. I flipped to the week of the pour. I read my own cramped notes. Lab tech late. Supervisor called. Mix hot. Air content not measured at delivery. Cover agreed. I wrote like a man trying to keep the day from slipping. I always did. It's why I could tell myself the truth in those pages even when other people told another version. I decided to find the kid who had been late. Not to blame him. To ask him what he had been told. He worked at a materials testing lab that took work from whoever needed cylinders broken and slump measured. Labs like that survive on thin margins. They do what they can to hold on to clients. The website had a list of our team headshots that looked like they'd been taken against a wall in a back office. I recognized the kid right away. Name under the photo. I sent him a message. No accusation. A simple request to talk, off the record, about what he saw that day. I offered coffee somewhere neutral. I mentioned the weather in the first line on purpose. It makes you sound like a person, not a demand. He didn't answer. A day passed. Then a short reply. Can't. Sorry. I waited another day. I wrote one sentence back. Did someone tell you not to? No reply. I drove to the lab anyway. I told myself I was just going to sit in the car. I got out. Inside, the waiting area smelled like gypsum and heat. I asked the woman at the counter if I could leave a note. She looked at me like I was a bill she didn't want to open. She took the note with 2 fingers. As I turned to go, a door down the hall opened and a man stepped out. He wore clean boots and a belt with a shiny buckle. He had the face of someone who says, "Client," too often. "Can I help you?" he asked, already frowning. "Just leaving a note." "For who?" I said the kid's name. "He's out." "Right. When he gets back." The man stared at the note like it might be sticky. "We're very busy today," he said. "I remember the bridge job," I said. "Cold day. Late cylinders." "You wrote, 'within tolerance.'" He smiled with his mouth, not his eyes. "We write what the numbers say." "Sure," I said. "And where do the numbers come from when you don't take the test at the truck?" He didn't answer, and something passed between us that wasn't words. He knew I knew. I knew he knew. It sat there like a box neither of us would open in public. He set my note on the counter without looking at it and walked away. I went home, angry in a way that made my hands shake in small, mean motions. I knew the piece I was missing. It wasn't whether someone fudged a slump. It wasn't whether air content was guessed after the fact. It was the cores. The strength test. The report the lab stamped. You can't fake a broken cylinder if the city, the state, and the feds might look at it later. But you can choose which set of cylinders you break, and you can lose a set you don't like if the chain of custody is loose. You can also request a retest blaming, handling, and keep the first numbers in a drawer. I'd seen versions of it. Not often. But enough to know the smell. I filed a request under the state's public records law. I asked for every lab report tied to that pour, including the raw machine logs from the compression tester. I asked for chain of custody forms. I asked for emails between the lab and the contractor in the month before and after the pour. I kept the request simple. Narrow enough they couldn't reject it as too broad. Specific enough that if they stonewalled, they'd have to say it plain. The city clerk wrote back. She was new. I could tell by the way she apologized 3 times in 4 lines. She said she would start gathering records. She asked for patience. I waited and made coffee I didn't drink. I walked the dog. I checked the porch, then checked it again like the folder might knock by itself. What came back 10 days later wasn't tidy. It was better. Whoever scanned the files didn't bother to straighten the pages. The PDFs looked like a deck of cards dealt by a drunk. But the content was there. Batch tickets. Emails with times. Names I knew. Big parts of the pages were blacked out. The law lets them do that for personal info and attorney talk. The redactions worked like highlighter. You could see where the heat was by what they hid. 2 emails mattered. The first was from a lab manager to the contractor's project superintendent the week after the pour. Per our conversation, here are the preliminary results. As we discussed, given the placement conditions, we recommend a retest. There was an attachment. The attachment page was lost. You could see the file name, though, in the corner of the email. It ended with prelim. PDF. The second was from the contractor to my boss. We believe a misunderstanding at the truck led to air content not being measured at point of delivery. Our lab assures us the mix is suitable. Please advise if you want to proceed with patchwork to address any cosmetic concerns. That phrase, cosmetic concerns, sat in my throat like a bone. I printed the emails and circled the dates. One was 3 days after the pour. One was 2 weeks after, before we knew anything was wrong. Both showed the contractor and the lab talking first, then bringing us in with language that sanded off the corners. I sent another request to the state. This one went to the department office that handled federal funds. I knew the address because I'd sat in that waiting room once, holding a folder no one asked to see. I asked for the mechanical log from the compression machine for that project number. Most labs have a machine that records the date, the time, the load at failure, and a sample ID. You can't fake the machine's raw log without effort. I figured effort would be the tell. A man from the state wrote back the same day. He said those logs were kept by the lab. He added a line about, if available. If available, I wrote to my wife on a sticky note. I put it on the fridge. We both laughed, and I realized we hadn't in a week. I went back to the lab. I didn't ask for the kid this time. I asked for the manager. The same man with the shiny buckle came out. He didn't offer his hand. I want the compression machine log, I said. For the bridge project. That's not public. It is if the job was public. He tilted his head. We provide reports to the client. Raw logs are internal. So the client can't verify. He smiled. We stand by our numbers. Show me the log, I said. I'll believe you. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said exactly what I needed to hear. I left. I sat in my truck and stared at the steering wheel until the leather looked like a map. I could go two ways. I could send what I had to a reporter and watch my name sit under the word whistleblower, which sounds brave in headlines and cheap in comment sections. Or I could go smaller and cleaner. I chose small. I went to the kid's apartment. I got his address the dumb way. I looked him up in the county property database. If you rent, sometimes your name shows up in court filings when a landlord sues somebody else. Or your name shows up on a utility board agenda when they disconnect in bulk. His did. It wasn't something I was proud of. It worked. He lived in a row of low buildings painted the same beige the sun gives up on. I went at 7 at night. People were coming home. No one looked up. I knocked and stood back so I wouldn't look like a threat. He opened the door and saw me and went pale. I'm not here to hurt you, I said. I can't talk to you. You can, I said. You just think you shouldn't. He stared at his shoes. He was younger than I'd guessed. Early 20s. This was probably his second job. I'm the one who signed the report, I said. They're hanging it on me. I have a son. He reads comments. He looked up at that. He let the door swing wider. I have 5 minutes. We sat at a table that rocked on one leg. A TV murmured from the wall. The room smelled like cheap pizza and shoe rubber. I was late, he said. The day of the poor. My car wouldn't start. I called my supervisor. He told me to meet the truck at the site, but the foreman started without me. I took my air meter out anyway when I got there, but the load was already down. The superintendent told me to take air off the next truck and mark it down as representative. I said I couldn't. He told me to call my supervisor. I did. My supervisor said we don't want to lose a client over one missed test. Did you write that down? He laughed once, no humor. We don't write that down. What about the cylinders? I made them at the washout from what was left in the chute, he said. It wasn't ideal. The superintendent told me to mark them for the second truck. My supervisor said it was okay given conditions. Did the numbers come back low? He looked at the TV instead of me. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want my son to think his dad cut corners, I said. We can both want things. He sighed. One set broke low, he said. We made a second set the next day. We marked them as retest due to handling concerns. Those passed. We wrote the report off the retest and added the sentence about cold weather. And the machine log? He shrugged. We put the ID in by hand when we break. The log prints with whatever ID you type. If you type the second set's numbers with the first set's ID, it looks like the first set passed. I'm not saying we did that. I'm saying you could. I felt something in my chest that wasn't anger. It was colder. A kind of hard clarity that walks in and sits down and starts taking notes. Thank you, I said. That's all I needed. He nodded and stared at the TV like we were watching something together. I left him a card with my number. He looked at it like it might burn. On the way home, I stopped at a grocery store and bought apples I didn't need. I stood in the parking lot and called a number my wife had given me once but I never thought I'd use. She worked with a woman whose sister was a lawyer. Not one of the billboard ones. A real one who stayed quiet and read everything twice. I told her the outline. She told me not to send anything to the press yet. She told me to gather 3 things: the request chain I'd already started, an affidavit from someone at the lab if I could get it, and any proof of pressure from the contractor to our office. People don't go to jail for sloppy testing, she said. They go to jail for faking records and lying after. I'm not after jail, I said. I'm after true. True has a better chance if you keep your head down, she said. And stop visiting people at night. That can look like something it isn't. I laughed. It surprised me. Understood. We made a plan. She would send a letter to the city asking them to preserve all records and communications without deleting or shredding. She would send a separate letter to the lab asking for the machine log as a third-party custodian, in anticipation of litigation. She said that phrase the way a carpenter says, plumb, like gravity itself agreed. I went home and wrote everything down while it was fresh. Exact words the kid used. Exact time. Exact look on his face when he said, "We don't write that down." You have to be your own court reporter when you don't trust anyone else to keep the transcript. The next morning, my boss called. He never called from his own phone anymore. He used the office line like a man who knows logs can be checked. You went to the lab, he said. Yes. That's not helpful. It's helpful to me. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear the burble of the fish tank in the lobby behind him. You're making this worse for yourself, he said finally. If you cooperate, the investigation might consider your service. If you don't, they might think you're trying to cover. Cover what? I asked. Let's not do this, he said. Turn in your truck. HR will be in touch about benefits. He hung up. I drove the truck over that afternoon and handed the keys to a man who avoided my eyes. I took my thermos from the cup holder and a pair of gloves that had my name written on the cuff. A younger inspector watched me from the door like I might yank the building down on my way out. I left. I stood on the sidewalk and realized I didn't have a place to be. It's a strange kind of lost, being 50 feet from your old desk and a mile from any map. 2 days later, the lawyer called. The lab sent something, she said. It's a partial log. The line with your project number exists. The time stamp suggests a break the day after the pour. That's not normal unless it was a field-cured set, which this wasn't supposed to be. What does that mean? It means the numbers that count were likely from the retest. It means the report that has your signature is built on the second set as if the first never mattered. It means someone made a choice and never told you. It should have felt like relief. It felt like a draft under a door in winter. What now? Now we send this to the state and the feds because federal money was on that bridge. And we ask the city to put the lab and the contractor on notice for potential fraud. And we don't talk to reporters until we have one more piece. What piece? Pressure, she said. We need proof the contractor leaned on your office to accept the pour despite the missed air test. They did. But it was calls. Find emails, she said. Find a text. Find anything written. I didn't sleep that night. At 2 in the morning, I remembered something small. In my field book the day of the pour, I had written a note, "Boss says, stop slowing the pour." I had a time next to it. I had also written, "Call from Superintendent accept load, we'll deal with it later." 2 time stamps. 2 phrases in quotes. If I said those words in court, they would look like my memory. If I showed them with a time, taken in the moment, they would look like a record. We scanned the pages. The lawyer sent them with the letters. She used the word spoliation in one of them. That word makes people who keep records sit up straight. The city went quiet for a week. The lab hired a firm with a name that looked heavy. The contractor gave a statement at a council meeting about commitment to quality. My name didn't come up, which was its own relief and insult. Then the thing I didn't plan on happened. The kid from the lab called me. It was a Sunday. I was raking leaves that didn't belong to my tree but fell in my yard anyway. The dog chased the rake like it made a sound only she could hear. "I can't sleep," he said. I wrote a statement. "I'm going to send it to your lawyer." "You don't have to," I said. "I know," he said. "But I keep seeing your name in the comments. I keep seeing the video. If I don't write it now, I'll turn into the kind of person who can live with it." He sent the statement that night. It was short. It said he wasn't present when the first truck discharged. It said he was instructed by both his supervisor and the contractor to treat the second truck as representative. It said the first set of cylinders broke low. It said the report used the second set. It said he had been told to keep the preliminary numbers internal and to label the retest as handling concern to justify the do-over. The lawyer sent his statement with our letters to the state and the feds. She didn't send it to the city first. She said the city would try to steer it. She wanted people with subpoena power to read it with their own eyes before anyone framed it to them. I waited. My wife told me to take walks during the day. My son went quiet and careful the way teenagers do when they think anything they say might start a fight. I told him we were okay. He nodded like he didn't believe me but wanted to. 2 weeks later, the state came to town. You can tell the difference between a courtesy meeting and an actual one by the number of people who bring empty notebooks. These people brought laptops and named the files as they typed. They asked to see everyone's email. They asked for personal phones with work messages on them. Someone said no, and someone else said the word warrant in a calm voice, and then someone said yes after all. The contractor sent a lawyer. The lab sent 2. They didn't talk to me first. They talked to my boss. He walked past me in the hallway afterward like I wasn't there. They talked to the kid. He came out of the building pale and shaking but with his jaw set like a door that finally latched. They talked to the lab manager. He didn't come out pale. He came out angry. He walked to his truck fast and left fast and almost hit a trash can. I stood there and realized I was enjoying that, and part of me didn't like the part of me that did. The investigation didn't end in a day. Nothing like this does. But the next council meeting, a different story showed up. It wasn't about me. It was about a breakdown in testing protocol and non-compliant documentation by third parties. The city attorney used phrases like referral to the appropriate authorities. The director kept his hands flat on the table, but this time they weren't pinning anything. They looked tired. A reporter called me. Not the guy with the phone on my porch. A woman who sounded like she took careful notes. I said I couldn't talk about the details, but I could say one thing: we all want the road to be safe, I said. That starts with telling the truth even when it slows a pour. She ran that line. People made fun of it online because people make fun of anything. Some said I was pretending to be a hero. Some said I was a scapegoat who couldn't take a hit. Some said they didn't care as long as the road opened. Noise, mostly. But in the middle of it, there was a man who wrote, "My kid was on that bus. Thank you for not letting this slide." I printed that out and taped it inside my field book like a page I'd earned. The city called me in the next week. The director looked older. The attorney's tie was loose. They said the investigation found issues with the lab's reports and the contractor's communications. They said my signature would be removed from the public release where it suggested responsibility for strength verification. They said the city planned to terminate its contract with the lab and the contractor was being suspended from bidding for a period while the state reviewed. They said a lot of things in careful language. Then the director did something I didn't expect. He apologized. "I didn't want this to be my fight," he said. "But it's mine anyway." I nodded. "It was mine first," I said. "Now it's where it belongs." They offered me my job back. Not right away. "After the dust settles," the director said. "There's always dust." I told them I'd think about it. I went home and sat in the driveway in my car until the moon sat on the neighbor's roof like a light I forgot to turn off. My wife came out and handed me a bowl of soup and didn't say anything until I finished it. "What will you do?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. I liked being the person who kept the line straight. "I don't know if I can go back in and pretend the line is straight because the paper says so." "You could be the person who makes the paper match the line," she said. We laughed, because it sounded like a fortune cookie. But she was right. The job hadn't changed. I had. Or maybe I'd always been the same, and the world took a shape around me that didn't fit for a while. The state's report came out 2 months later. It wasn't a movie ending. No one went in handcuffs. There were fines. There were training requirements. There was a paragraph that said an inspector had raised concerns in real time and those concerns were overridden. They left my name out. They didn't have to. I knew. The kid from the lab got a new job at a different outfit in another town. He sent me a text with one line, "Thanks for not making me a villain." I went back to work in the spring, not at the city but for a small town up the highway that still believed a slow pour costs less than a fast failure. The roads didn't look any different. The bridge in our town stood solid under the same traffic as before. It wasn't the patch I watched when I drove by. It was the seam I could still feel if I closed my eyes. On my first day in the new job, I met a crew pouring a short run of curb on a side street near a school. The foreman joked about inspectors, the way they do to test you. I smiled and told him I used to believe inspectors were the slowest men on earth. He laughed and said, "Still do." We got along fine after that. The lab tech showed up early. He checked the air right at the truck. The numbers looked good. I made note of the time. I made note of the weather. I made note of who said what when. I always will. I think about my name on that line sometimes. The pen stuck that day. The scratch of it still lives in my hand. The truth is, I did sign it. I put my name on work that wasn't as strong as we pretended. I trusted paper that told a smooth story because the job was late and the phones were ringing and the video hadn't happened yet. I can say pressure and protocol and third party and make it sound like the fault belonged to a fog. But I'm the one who pressed down hard. I'm the one who knew better than to trust a number without its birth certificate. It's not a confession to say that. It's a way of saying something I can live with. The road under your tires looks flat until you put a level on it. Then you see the crown. Then you see the fall. Then you see the small slope that carries water away so the freeze won't pop the surface and make a pothole where a kid on a bike might fall. None of that is dramatic. None of that will ever make a video. But that's where the work is. In the inch you shave, the minute you wait, the phone you ignore because your gut tells you the line isn't straight yet. They made me sign, is the story some people tell when they talk about me. It's cleaner. It makes the villains sharp and the victims soft. The real story is smaller and messier. I signed because I thought the people upstream had done their part. I signed because I didn't want to be the man who made a crew wash out a truck on a cold day. I signed because I was tired. I don't sign like that anymore. If you ask me what justice looks like, I won't say fines or memos or the word compliance said 10 times in a row. Justice is a kid in a lab coat who writes a statement when he could keep quiet and get promoted. Justice is a director who says, "I'm sorry," in a room where no one says that. Justice is a small town hiring a man whose name trended for a week and treating him like a person who knows where the line is. The bridge stands. The school bus still crosses it every morning. When I drive over, I take my foot off the gas and let the car roll. I watch the water that looks still from a distance but moves fast if you stare. I don't think about the video anymore. I think about the seam you can't see unless you know where to look. I think about the way truth isn't loud but it holds. I think about my son, who stopped reading comments and started asking questions about work I can answer in full sentences. I put my name on things again. I press the pen down hard. The paper is still thick. The ball still skips sometimes. I keep writing until the ink flows.